My uncle died 2 years ago, and I inherited his house. Not because I was his favorite. I wasn't. Not by a long shot. But because I was the only family member left who didn't already have a place of his own. My uncle, Desmond, was the kind of guy who spent 40 years turning wrenches. He raced bikes when he was younger, then spent the rest of his life fixing other people's, running a small shop out of the barn behind his house. I grew up loving motorcycles because of him. He was the reason I got into bikes in the first place, and honestly, part of me was excited to move into that house. I figured I'd finally have space to work on my own builds, maybe even keep his old shop running as a hobby. I want to say up front that I'm not a superstitious person. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in curses. And up until about a year ago, I would have laughed at anyone who told me otherwise. I'm telling you this now because I need you to understand that everything I'm about to describe, I fought against believing for a long time. The house sat on about 4 acres out past the edge of town, close enough to be convenient, far enough that you couldn't see your neighbor's lights at night. Behind the house was the barn my uncle converted into his workshop decades ago. Steel siding, 2 roll-up doors, a single window on the side facing the house. He'd built it himself back in the 70s, and it still had most of his equipment in it when I moved in. Lifts, tool chests, a parts washer, shelves of manuals going back to bikes that don't even exist as brands anymore. It smelled like every garage smells, oil and metal and old rubber, and honestly it smelled like him. I liked that. I didn't touch much of it for the first few months. I was still working through probate, dealing with the estate, and the shop just sat there, locked up, waiting. About 4 months after I moved in, I started spending more time out there. I wanted to restore an old CB750 I'd picked up years ago and never had the space to work on properly. I'd go out most evenings after work, put a few hours in, come back to the house around 10 or 11. Nothing about those early nights out there felt strange. If anything, it felt good, like I was carrying something forward. The first thing that happened, I genuinely didn't think twice about. I came home from work one night in early spring and noticed the shop light was on. Not the outside floodlight, the inside light, the one over the main bench, visible as a strip of yellow under the gap of the roll-up door. I hadn't been out there in 2 days. I remember standing in my kitchen looking at that light through the window, running through the possibilities. Maybe I'd left it on. Maybe the timer switch my uncle installed on some of the outlets years ago had glitched and kicked something on. Old buildings have old wiring, and old wiring does strange things. I walked out, flipped the light off, checked the breaker box just to be safe, and went back inside. I didn't lose a second of sleep over it. A week later it happened again. Same light, same time of night, and this time I was almost certain I'd shut it off the last time I'd been out there. I stood in the doorway for a minute before I even flipped the switch, just looking around the shop like I expected to see someone standing at the bench. Nobody was there, obviously, just tools laid out the way I'd left them, my half-stripped CB750 up on the lift where I'd left it. I told myself it was the wiring again. My uncle wired that building himself in 1978, and if there's one thing I know about a 50-year-old barn, it's that things fail in ways that don't always make sense. I made a mental note to call an electrician and didn't think much more about it. The wiring theory started to feel a lot less convincing about 2 weeks after that. I'd gone out to the shop around 9 at night, later than usual, just to move a part I needed for the next day. I wasn't planning on working. I walked in, grabbed what I needed off the shelf, and I was halfway back to the door when I heard it, the unmistakable click and whine of a starter motor turning over, followed by an engine catching and idling. It was coming from the far corner of the shop, near where my uncle used to keep his personal bike, an old Norton he never sold. That corner was empty now, had been empty since before he died, according to my aunt. There was nothing back there but a stained patch of concrete and a tarp folded up on a shelf. I stood absolutely still. The sound was not faint. It was a clean, warm, 4-stroke idle, the kind of sound you know instantly if you've spent any real time around bikes. And it was coming from an empty corner of a building I was standing alone in. I did what I think most people would do, which is nothing, for about 10 full seconds. Then the idle just stopped. Not sputtered out, not died, stopped. The way an engine stops when you're used to hearing someone flip a kill switch. Silence after that. Full, ringing silence. The kind where you can hear your own pulse in your ears. I want to be honest and say I did not investigate that corner that night. I left the shop, locked both roll-up doors, which I'd never bothered doing before, and went back inside. I told myself I was tired. I told myself sound travels strangely in metal buildings, that maybe it was a neighbor's equipment carrying on the wind, though the nearest neighbor was almost a mile off, and I couldn't think of a single reason their generator, or whatever it was, would sound exactly like an idling motorcycle engine. I am, by nature, the kind of person who needs an explanation, even a bad one, before I'll accept that something scared me. That night, I didn't have one, and I slept with the bedroom light on for the first time since I was a kid. For a while after that, things were quiet. Almost a month went by with nothing out of the ordinary, and I started to relax into the idea that it had been some kind of fluke, a one-time thing, maybe even something I'd half imagined after a long day. I went back to working on the CB750 most evenings, though I'll admit, I avoided that back corner of the shop more than I probably needed to. Then my tools started moving. I'm particular about my tools. It's a habit my uncle drilled into me as a kid. Everything goes back in its spot, every time, no exceptions, because a missing wrench at 2 in the morning on the side of the road will teach you real fast why organization matters. I keep my sockets in size order. I keep my screwdrivers in the same drawer, flathead on the left, Phillips on the right. So when I came out one evening and found a 10mm socket sitting on the workbench instead of in the case, I noticed immediately. I figured I'd just been careless the last time I was out there. I put it back. The next night, it was out again, sitting in almost the exact same spot on the bench, along with a shop rag laid out flat next to it, like someone had set it down mid-task. I laughed it off with a friend of mine, Marcus, who used to help my uncle out from time to time, and still stopped by occasionally to shoot the breeze. I told him about the light and the socket and even the engine sound, mostly as a joke, expecting him to laugh along with me and tell me the place was just old and settling. He didn't laugh. He got quiet, actually, in a way that made me uncomfortable, and asked me if I'd been going into the back corner of the shop much. I told him not really, and asked him why. He said it took him a second to answer, and when he did, all he said was that the shop always felt off back there, even before my uncle passed, and that my uncle used to keep a police scanner running on a shelf near that corner, always on, even when nobody was working. I asked him why. Marcus just shrugged and said my uncle never really explained it, just said it helped him keep track of things. I didn't think much of that comment at the time. I wish I had. The real turning point happened on a night in late June. I remember the date because it was the day before my birthday, and I'd gone out to the shop a little later than usual, close to 11, mostly because I couldn't sleep, and figured I'd get a head start on the birthday gift I was giving myself. Finally mounting the tank on the CB750, I pulled into the gravel drive, and before I even got out of my truck, I saw it. Through the single side window of the shop, illuminated by the work light I definitely remembered turning off, there was a shape bent over the lift. A person-shaped shape, hunched forward the way you hunch when you're working on something low to the ground, arms moving in small, repetitive motions. My first thought, and I mean this honestly, was that someone had broken in. That's the rational explanation, right? A person is a person, and people break into unlocked barns in the middle of nowhere all the time looking for tools to steal. I sat in my truck for a solid minute, debating whether to call the police first or go check it out myself. I ended up grabbing the tire iron from behind my seat and walking up quiet, the way you do when you don't want to announce yourself. I got close enough to look through the window properly, and that's when the rational explanation stopped holding together. The shape at the bench wasn't solid. I don't know how else to describe it. It had the general form of a person, head, shoulders, the bend of a back, the motion of arms, but it didn't have edges the way a person has edges. The light from the work lamp passed through parts of it in a way that made the shadows on the wall behind it wrong, doubled, like there were two shadows being cast from one shape and they weren't lined up with each other. It kept working. Whatever it was doing at that bench, it did not stop, did not turn around, did not react to me standing outside that window at all. I did not go in. I want to be clear about that. Every instinct in me said not to go in, and for once in my life I listened to that instinct completely. I backed away from the window slowly, got back to my truck, and just sat there watching the light in the shop for close to 20 minutes. At some point during that 20 minutes, the shape straightened up, stood there for a moment facing the wall, and then the light went out. Not flickered, went out, all at once, the whole building dark. I sat in that truck until almost 1 in the morning before I could make myself go into my own house. I called Marcus the next day and told him everything, all of it, without leaving anything out this time. He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he asked me to come by his place instead of talking about it over the phone, which should have told me something on its own. When I got there, he had an old photo album out on his kitchen table, the kind with the sticky plastic pages that go yellow with age. He told me something my uncle never told anyone in the family, something Marcus only knew because he'd worked alongside my uncle for almost 15 years. Back in the 80s, before I was born, my uncle had an apprentice at the shop, a kid named Ray, maybe 19 or 20 at the time. According to Marcus, Ray was sharp, good with engines, the kind of kid my uncle genuinely liked training up. One night, working late by himself on a customer's bike, the same corner of the shop, the corner where I heard the engine and saw the light, something went wrong. Marcus wasn't totally clear on the details, only that it involved the lift failing while Ray was underneath a bike, and that by the time my uncle found him the next morning, Ray had been dead for hours. My uncle never forgave himself for not being there. Marcus said that's why he kept the scanner running, always tuned to the local emergency frequency, every night after that, for the rest of his life. He wanted to know immediately if anything ever happened out there again. He never wanted to find out too late a second time. I asked Marcus why nobody in my family ever mentioned this. He said my uncle asked everyone who knew to keep it quiet, out of respect for Ray's family, and that as far as he knew, nobody had spoken Ray's name out loud in that shop in almost 40 years. I didn't sleep the night Marcus told me that story. I kept turning it over, trying to fit it into something that made sense. The way I'd tried to explain away the light and the socket and the engine sound, none of it fit cleanly. It still doesn't. I didn't go back into the shop for almost 2 weeks after that conversation. When I finally did, I brought a small radio scanner with me, one I bought used off a classified ad, without really examining my own reasons for wanting one. I set it on the shelf where Marcus said my uncle used to keep his, right near that back corner, and I turned it on. I don't fully know why. Maybe some part of me wanted to finish what my uncle started. Maybe I just wanted to feel like I was doing something instead of just being afraid in an empty building. The scanner mostly picked up static and the occasional dispatch chatter from the county line, nothing unusual. But some nights, not every night, just some, I'd catch something underneath the static that didn't belong there. A voice, low, cutting in and out, saying what sounded like a name. I never could make out the whole word clean, but the shape of it, the rhythm of it, sounded a lot like Ray. I've told myself a dozen different explanations for that. Radio interference, my own mind filling in gaps, pattern recognition doing what pattern recognition does when you're primed to hear something. I've never fully believed any of those explanations. Not really. Not the way I believed the wiring excuse back at the very beginning. The engine sound came back one more time, about 3 months after Marcus told me about Ray. I was out working late, and I heard it start up again from that same corner, clear as anything, idling steady for almost a full minute before cutting out. This time I didn't leave. I don't know what came over me. Maybe it was knowing the story now. Maybe it was just exhaustion with being afraid in my own workshop. But I walked toward that corner while the engine was still running. I got within a few feet of that stained patch of concrete, close enough that I could feel a difference in the air, a coldness that didn't match the rest of the building, and I said his name out loud, Ray. I don't know why I did it. I just felt like it needed saying, after 40 years of nobody saying it. The engine sound stopped instantly, mid-idle, the way you'd cut it with a kill switch. And then, for just a second, maybe less, I felt something brush past my shoulder, moving toward the shop doors, moving toward the outside. The temperature in that corner went back to normal almost immediately after. I stood there a long time after that, not scared exactly, more just sort of hollowed out, the way you feel after crying hard about something you didn't know you were still carrying. Nothing has happened in the shop since that night. No lights turning on by themselves, no tools moved, no engine sound from an empty corner. The scanner still picks up static most nights, and every so often, I still think I hear that same low voice underneath it. But it's been months now since anything felt clearly, undeniably wrong out there. I finished the CB750 last spring. I ride it sometimes out past the property line, down the same roads my uncle used to ride when he was younger than I am now. I still work in that shop most evenings, in that same back corner even, though I'll admit I still feel a small chill sometimes when the light catches the concrete a certain way. I don't know what I believe happened out there, not exactly. I don't think Ray was ever trying to hurt anyone. If anything, the longer I sit with it, the more I think whatever was happening in that shop wasn't about scaring me at all. I think it was about being remembered. My uncle carried that guilt alone for 40 years, listening to a scanner every night, waiting for a call that was never going to come, because it had already happened, and he'd already missed it. Maybe that kind of grief doesn't just disappear when the person carrying it dies. Maybe it has to go somewhere. I keep the scanner on most nights now, same shelf, same spot. I don't know if I'm keeping a promise my uncle made or making one of my own. But some nights, when it's quiet enough, I still hear that voice underneath the static, and some nights, I still say his name back.